Now, Partech Ventures launched a €100 million fund focused on digital technology startups in sub-Saharan Africa, a sector that's expected to contribute about $300 billion to the region's GDP by the year 2025. That's according to Mckinsey Global Institute. Olawale Ayeni, Africa lead for venture capital at the International Finance Corporation IFC, joins me to discuss ways to bridge the funding gap for tech startups on the continent. Wale, thank you so much. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So €100 million, that's a lot of money to raise via venture capital for tech startups. But let's talk about the funding gap that we're looking at. How big is this funding gap? Help us understand it.
Venture capital as an asset class, as you know, invests in technology all over the globe. From the initial stats that we have, there's about $100 billion deployed globally in this asset space. Africa gets about 200 to 300 million of that. So you can see that from those numbers, there's a huge gap between what Africa gets in that asset class versus the rest of the world. And then given the young population, given the adoption of technology in Africa as a whole, and given the youth talent and how they're embracing entrepreneurship, we believe that there's a significant gap in financing and supporting those startups to actually scale and grow in Africa.
So what is the problem? Why don't we have a higher amount coming to African startups? Is it a lack of visibility? Because I know that part of what this fund also seeks to, what the IFC is also trying to do, is to give exposure visibility of the African startups to European countries in the West. So why is the money not so much?
The trend has actually been improving over the years. Okay. So initially it was quite small, but what we've seen is that over the years the amount of money in tech in Africa has actually been growing, although it's still small. In Africa, what we see is that there's a plethora of young entrepreneurs that are creating a real digital innovation to solve problems, as they say. And part of the goal is to create financing to support them. What we do in the venture capital group is, we actually mostly invest directly in tech companies globally in frontier markets, but in nascent markets like Africa, where there's not enough venture capital funds, we also have to develop the capacity of fund managers to actually grow and scale. So we're doing a two-pronged approach where we're investing directly in tech companies, but we're also investing in fund managers in venture capital. And I wouldn't see it specifically as a problem. I'll see it as an opportunity because given the amount of talent we're seeing on the continent right now, there's an opportunity for more financiers to come and support the startups. Now, information about tech in Africa is limited. It's a new asset class on the continent, but what we're seeing is increasing recognition that the digital economy has a role to play in development in Africa.
So how do we increase this visibility? Yes, I know that you say it's improving, yeah, and an institution like the IFC is putting cash on the table. But for the startups themselves in their individual African countries, how can they on their own, increase that visibility?
There are two ways to increase visibility, and we always talk about this. And it's kind of an African saying that success begets success. The number one way of increasing visibility is supporting the tech startups that are here to grow and scale and to become African success stories in technology. Once that happens, it's kind of a reinforcing cycle where as more startups become successful, founders become more savvy in technology investing, technology entrepreneurship, they have more money. What then happens is that angel investments start to grow. And then the second thing that happens, number two, is that as more people make money in technology in Africa, more people focus on it and focus on it as an asset class. Most of the wealth, I'll say in the last 4 or 5 decades in Africa, have not really come from technology. They've come from real industries like agriculture, FMCG goods. But we're seeing a shift given that the telcos were the first ones that came in and they've done quite well. So now there are more Africans that are connected to the internet. If you look at the stats, by the year 2020, about 500 million Africans are going to have smartphones. That is greater than the population of the United States. And that's an opportunity where you can overlay that digital entrepreneurship on top of that and create big businesses out of that. But we see that it's a gradual process, but there's a lot of promise in there.
Okay. Yes, there's promise, but it's often said that a good percentage of startups don't even make it past the second year. Yeah. So I'm thinking, when I hear about the business of tech startups, yeah, there isn't focus on how long, longevity, how they survive, and, if they cross that proverbial 2-year, mark. Is that a problem? To what extent is that a problem, even for tech startups, especially for those who do not make it before they get that visibility and that much needed funding?
I love that question. I get it a lot. But what we do, and so actually it's a very fair question. And venture capital as an asset class is one of the few asset classes that actually believes in the future. It believes in hockey sticks. It believes in fundamental change. What that means is that when we're correct and right, we're very, very correct and right. However, because it's a risky asset class, there's a lot of failures. So from what we're doing, changing the world and grasping technology and disruption, it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So we accept that there's going to be a lot of failures. The two most important things in technology and entrepreneurship is that, A, you learn from your failures. We don't think that there won't be failures. Obviously, startups, they try, they experiment. If it's really hard, they'll fail a few times. But you learn from your failures and then do something else and grow. And the second thing also is that if you're very, very successful, then you're very, very successful. The trick, though, is to use technology to really attack large markets that you can disrupt. And the unique thing about Africa is that there's a lot of large markets that technology can disrupt, whether that's healthcare, whether that's logistics, supply chain, whether that's education. So there's a plethora of sectors where you can really use technology to get to the mass market, because the mass market is now becoming more and more digitally savvy. Having said that, I totally agree with you that you will fail more than you succeed, but once you succeed, you really, really succeed. And we're kind of comfortable with that idea in the asset class.
Would you say that the ecosystem now, because I know that, tech startups, it's not exactly a new thing. We've had it for a couple of years. Would you say that the ecosystem now is more supportive? And I guess I suppose that will range from country to country.
Yeah.
Would you say that from your experience, let me ask you from that angle, would you say that the ecosystem is more supportive and in the sense that before a tech startup can fail, it would take a while, or is it still?
I think there's a lot of support. I totally agree with you. I think it's definitely more supportive now than it was 10 years ago. There's a bunch of accelerators now, particularly the early stage of things. Like now, I think around Africa, there are about 301 accelerators, incubators, where founders can receive kind of early stage training, mentoring. That still needs to grow and expand, but what we're seeing is it's improving. And what we're also seeing, which we actually really, really like, is that a lot of young talent now, they're boycotting the traditional education system and going directly to coding and understanding that, A, with a laptop, you can create a product, and because it's connected to the internet, your market can be the world.
Okay, let's go right into this fund, Partech Ventures. IFC, you've helped them raise 100 million, which is expected to be the largest venture capital fund focused on digital technology startups. Now, IFC has a 15 million euro stake. You're the anchor investor. Why Partech investor? What is so special about this company?
So the way we analyze funds is actually 3 steps. Number one thing about a fund that you need to understand, does the fund understand the asset class, which is venture capital? Partech has been around since 1982. They have offices in San Francisco, London, Paris, Berlin. They have $1.1 billion in assets under management in the venture space, and they have a track record of supporting companies and founders through various stages of their development. So that checks the box that these guys understand venture capital. Number 2, do they have a differentiated strategy? Their strategy around just their deep integration with a lot of corporates gives them a lot of exit opportunities globally, and they have various funds at various life cycles, whether they're seed, early growth, so they have that experience where they can be multi-stage. So we like that, and that's number 2. The third fact is actually, do the partners understand the region? The 2 partners for Africa are 2 Africans that have been around in Africa for a long time, extensive operational experience on the continent. So the combination of those 3 things, Bill and Tijan and Partech as a venture manager, we're more than happy to support their foray into Africa to help develop this venture asset class here.
Now, according to a statement from Partech, they say that, I mean, they have a very hands-on and operational team, and they close around 70 deals a year.
Yeah.
Is that a high number? I mean, when I hear 70, I'm like, oh, wow, 70 deals a year.
No, they have, so that's why I said it's a big fund. It's been around for a long time. So not 70 deals a year in Africa, but 70 deals globally. It's a global
so
fund,
how much
yeah.
of that, do you know, I mean, out of that 70, how many of that happened or has happened in Africa?
No, so basically this Partech Ventures Africa is their first dedicated fund for Africa in the venture space. So they've been operating mostly in Europe and the US, and the fund we closed for them is to allow them to operate in Africa as well, so that this asset class can grow on the continent.
Okay, so as from a cash perspective, they have this bigger arsenal now.
Yeah.
I mean, so what happens from here? 100 million euros on the table, what's the next step?
Well, we hope that they create the next African Zuckerberg. So that is the next step.
What are your expectations in terms that they begin to deploy this? I mean, are there startups or projects in the pipeline that they're keeping? I'm just wondering your relationship. I mean, you put all this money, you've helped them raise all this money. So I mean, I understand you will be keeping an eye on how
obviously, obviously. So the fund, the African fund, is a truly pan-African fund. So it invests both in Anglophone Africa and Francophone Africa. Countries that will be focused include Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Senegal, Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire. Okay. Sectors that they're going to invest in include, consumer internet broadly, logistics, fintech. So there's a plethora of opportunities they're seeing that they've shown us, and we think that there's the one thing I would say is that there's not a lack of pipeline in the tech space in Africa. What is lacking is financing, and this plugs the gap. So we expect a lot from them. We expect them to deploy in conjunction and in partnership with us, because like I said, primarily our goal is to do direct investments in tech. So we also invest, but we also want to make sure that other venture capital funds have the capacity to invest as well, because obviously we can't or would not expect ourselves to cover the entire of Africa.
We're continuing our focus on bridging the funding gap for technology startups in Africa. Still with me is Olawale Ayeni, Africa lead for venture capital at the International Finance Corporation, the IFC. Wale, thank you for your time so far.
Thank you.
Now, you said that this fund is open to countries across Africa, but you also say that 8 countries show a stronger need for this fund. Why is that? And I see the likes of Nigeria, Senegal, smaller countries like Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire. Can you explain that to us? So
the fund has a multi-stage strategy, which means that they will invest both at the early stage, the mid-stage, and the growth stage. Early means people that are just starting out. Mid-stage, people that are starting to grow, and then growth is like you need to just turbocharge them to really, really scale. Various countries will have various needs. The fund is going to deploy or invest as little as 500K in a company to as high as 5 million. So giving that example, Nigeria and Kenya are a little bit more developed ecosystem, so those will mostly be growth stage. But like Cameroon and some other countries that are starting out will probably be more earlier stage. But that's what is unique, and that's what we like about this fund, is that there are various funding gaps at different levels, so they're able to target the needs as they go across Africa.
Partech, part of the statement from Partech says that they're going to give these African startups access to European and US markets. So, I mean, what's the idea? What do they have in mind? So
what I have in mind is they have a lot of relationships. Like I said, it's a global fund. They've been in Europe and US for a long time. So basically to understand, give the startups that invest in here global visibility. The good thing with technology is that even though you might be an African startup, you might attack African problems. Some African problems are actually global problems as well. So once you want to scale globally, they're there to help you. If you need partnerships globally, they have corporations that they know across both continents that could help you as well. So they want to leverage all that asset that they have globally to African startups.
Are there any African, startups, tech startups that, that are already making a name for themselves in global markets?
There's a few. Andela is a great example. The IFC is an investor in Andela. Andela is an ed tech company that believes talent is equally distributed. And what they're doing is training African talent to serve global needs. They've been uniquely successful. They have clients including Facebook and large corporations that actually use African talent. So there's a plethora, like there's a lot of examples of tech startups that go global.
Now, earlier you mentioned that, part of the big picture of this fund is to, create an African Mark Zuckerbergs, you know, and I'm just thinking, do we have that yet? What are your hopes for that, you know, that happening? Because it's true. I mean, we hear about, you know, scattered success stories. I mean, the one you've just given, but I'm thinking those, you know, names that you just hear, you know, that, oh, that's like a Mark Zuckerberg, but he's, you know, originated from Africa. Yeah,
no, I mean, it's a true point, but what I'll say that it takes time to get there. We're encouraged by what we're seeing. I can tell you that there's a few startups that we know that are on the path to getting there. There's talent that we see on the continent as well. So to say and point to one specific Mark Zuckerberg right now, I don't think I can, but I think that we're very encouraged by what we're seeing in the pipeline. Okay, so Partech is just one. For the IFC, would you be on the lookout for other similar funds like this who have made a name for themselves, know the region very well, and are able to harness the talents, you know, and of course disperse the monies accordingly? Is that something that the IFC is also, you know, looking to? In the IFC, in the venture capital group, we're very focused on developing the venture ecosystem in Africa. And like I said, that involves two things. We've invested aggressively directly in companies. For instance, we invested in Andela, we invested in Mobisol, which is a clean tech company in Tanzania. Okay. We invested in Bridge. We have some early stage fintech companies, Zuna, InterSwitch, Fari. So beyond the direct investments, we also invest in funds because we need to develop that capacity. And to answer your question, yeah, we are definitely looking for other funds that we could potentially support as well.
But are there key sectors that you are particular about? I mean, I hear fintech coming up so many times. It would appear that, I mean, that's like a sure sector that you know that would explode and perhaps also get value for money, but also help Africa to solve many of its, you know, social, you know, economic problems. So am I correct?
Not entirely. You're on your way there, but not entirely. We invest in a variety of sectors. So we invest in clean tech, we invest in health tech, agri-tech, consumer internet broadly. Basically, we invest in tech and tech-enabled businesses wherever you can use technology to lead to great impact, because we think that is achievable and that is doable. What I'll say is that various countries have various needs. So if you look at the history of kind of technology and adoption, the two things you want to solve is distribution of technology or digital services to the mass market, but also collection of payments for those services from the mass market. Some countries have it solved, some don't. The reason why fintech is huge in Nigeria is that payment is effectively not kind of broken here in Nigeria, and there's a lot of opportunity to solve that. If you go to East Africa, with M-Pesa, payment is already solved, so there are other sectors that are interested in e-logistics. If you go to Ethiopia, payment is still broken, so they're fixed in payment. If you go to South Africa, payment has been fixed, so there are other things like health tech that you can do. So I'll say that the opportunity is spread across the continent, and each country has different needs and different gaps that could be filled.
Yeah, well, that being said, because what I hear most of the time is, it's either fintech. Yes, I know. Health tech as well, that's gaining some traction. But at the heart of all of this is just helping Africa to, through this digital transformation, accelerate economic growth. And we know that in the next, all predictions point to, the year 2025 and beyond, the African youth population would have grown and, will be dominant on the continent. And we need to harness that talent because many of them, a good portion of them, have ideas and are focused on, this tech, digital world as it were. But do you see Africa, because at bottom line is, will it help Africa transform economically? What are your hopes at the IFC that this will happen? And are we monitoring? Is there monitoring? Are we monitoring these projects, this, performance, as it were?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the digital economy has a great place to play in the development of Africa, both from an impact perspective, but also from a GDP perspective. The one competitive advantage that Africa has beyond any other continent is that it is the youngest continent. 60% of the population in Africa is below the age of 24. And given the new adoption of technology within this youth and given the talent that they're starting to exhibit, that technology layer provides a great platform where you can effectively and more quickly distribute goods and services across all sectors, healthcare, education. That is impactful for kind of the new generation in Africa, right? So we feel that the digital, Mckinsey said it can contribute about 300 billion in the next 5 to 7 years, and we fundamentally believe in that. But for us to get there, we need to finance some of these opportunities. They need to have mentorship. There needs to be a great angel community. There needs to be VC, and there needs to be talent and exit as well. So I know I couldn't agree with you more that the digital economy has a great potential or can provide Africa the opportunity for greater development. Fundamentally, though, this is what we believe is that Africa has been looked upon as a market of 1.2 billion people. But with technology, you can actually flip that around and say Africa is a continent with 1.2 billion producers. And that's a very, very different kind of paradigm shift in our minds.
In your experience, what is, the typical investor out there and outside of the continent, VC, angel investors, how do they view African startups, tech startups, in terms of the quality of their ideas, the ability to put it all together, the business plan, and see through growth stages?
No, the three things that all VCs look at globally. Number one, what is the team? Is the team there? Can this set of people deliver the promise that they're pitching to you? Number two, product. Does that product affect a particular need? Is the product better than the last product? Or are people actually adapting that product as quickly as you claim they are? And then the third thing is market. Is there a problem in the market you're trying to fix? And is that problem big enough? Now, that is the general paradigm that all VCs will always analyze various opportunities. And then that will depend on the expertise of the VC's understanding of the market. But I think VCs, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in San Francisco, whether they're in China, they use kind of the same kind of filter, to analyze.
But is it getting better? The VC environment, angel investors, exit strategies. I'm just trying to get a picture of how, for instance, how it was last year and what we should expect would happen in 2018.
So there's a report that came out this year that last year the amount of investing in tech actually grew between 2016 and 2017. Disrupt Africa has a report out there that in 2017 it was 200 million versus about 150 the year before. So investing in tech is actually growing. The angel investing, there's a bunch of angel associations coming up. ABAN is a great example. It's kind of a pan-African angel network. It's starting to grow. It's early days. That could always be improved as well. So what we've seen is that it's still early days. There's still a lot of problems to solve, but the trajectory is in the upward trend.
But would you say that the typical African tech startup understands the kind of competition that's out there, understands how trends are changing and how trends are transforming the ecosystem, and are working with that mindset?
Now you're going to make me make friends and make enemies as well, so I don't know how to answer that question.
I guess, it is what it is.
but I'll say this. I'll say that trend is also improving. I think the African startups, most of them, and which is probably true and what you should do, is that you should solve a problem you totally understand very, very well. You shouldn't solve somebody else's problem. You should solve a problem that you understand. Now, the idea is that hopefully the problem you're trying to solve has regional scale, has national scale, and it has global scale. And that's important for VC, that the scale has to be big. But to answer your questions directly, I think just the talent and the problem skill set. I was talking to a startup the other day, and I'll give an example. I'll mention names. Kids from Lagos University here, they have a product they developed, and it's out there. 50% of their customers are from the US, another 20% is from India, another 10% is from Southeast Asia. And I was like, wow, they've developed something which they thought just was a problem that they had here. They put it on the internet.
They solve a domestic problem, but it turns out
to be a global problem. And we're seeing more and more of that, right? But to your point is that the internet provides you a global audience. Yes, you should solve national problems, regional problems, but then who knows, that could turn to a global problem you're trying to solve as well.
Interesting. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much
for
being here today. I've been speaking to Olawale Ayeni, Africa lead for venture capital at International Finance Corporation.